When I was young, my grandma used to tell me not to be wasteful. She'd remind me, everything goes somewhere. Meaning, whatever I was tossing didn't vanish. Sure, I was getting it off my hands, but I was also making it someone else's problem. It was great advice. Advice I followed for a while. But as I got older, I eventually became like everyone else. If I threw something out, it disappeared from my world. I didn't think about where it went or what it became. About a week ago, I heard a story that reminded me of my grandma's adage. I was in New York City visiting some friends. My train was early, so I stopped to get a coffee from the cart. It was served in one of those disposable amphora cups. You know, with the Greek design on the side. It says, "We are happy to serve you." Holding that cup made me nostalgic from when I lived in Manhattan years ago as a baby screenwriter. Back then, I traversed the city for hours with a coffee in hand, hoping for some inspiration. Anyway, when I finished the last of my brew, I tossed the cup in a receptacle, but it was overflowing, so it landed on a pile of garbage bags beside the bin. I hustled away. I don't walk in New York, I hustle. But I barely moved before I heard a voice, amplified through a megaphone. "You're feeding the beast." It belonged to a weary guy with lightning in his eyes, a fancy way of saying tired but passionate. He stalked around the corner of 38th and 7th with a sign on his neck. It said, "Stop the waste," which in hindsight was a little on the nose, but not everyone's a writer. This guy saw he had my attention, and so he stepped up real close, then asked if I knew why tossing my trash away was so easy. I didn't. And when I admitted as much, he told me there were people who made it easy. The folks who pick up the city's waste, haul it to a dump, see it on its way. Sanitation workers. They operate within a carefully orchestrated system, one that is designed so that the multitudes of New Yorkers can do what I just did, throw their junk out and forget about it. But if I'd listened, he wanted to tell me something I wouldn't forget. 'Cause each morsel of trash, each castaway item, it all goes somewhere. And on this crowded island, it goes straight into the belly of a ravenous, filthy monstrosity. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 31, The Trash Pit. His story spilled out of him in this urgent, panic way, so it didn't always make sense. Keep that in mind, because every now and then I'm going to have to fill in a few details myself. Anyway, his tale started with a guy named Dave. Dave was a higher-up in New York's Department of Sanitation. Guys like Dave weren't on the street emptying dumpsters, which was good for Dave, who considered himself more of an idea guy. His big-picture thinking had served him well so far. He'd gone from citizen volunteer to the commissioner's direct report in less than 5 years. But yeah, Dave wanted more. He was looking to be a hero, to solve Manhattan's sanitary dilemma. He pictured his name on some park bench somewhere, maybe a plaque at the Government Works building. Maybe. Dave always got ahead of himself. Anyway, the thing he was holding in his hand was the magic bullet he needed. A spray bottle, filled with his ticket to glory. To understand why this bottle's contents were so important, I have to explain the city's waste system, at least so far as I understand it. See, the trucks that pick up the curbside trash drop their haul at a transfer station. That station then ships the trash all over the place, to South Carolina, New Jersey, Long Island. Some goes to a landfill, some is burned. All this movement cost the city millions. Dave's big idea: reduce the volume of garbage. Of course, no one was going to convince each resident of Manhattan to cut their waste in half. So he'd ask a lab on Staten Island to make a chemical that could do it. You spray it on, the trash shrinks. Dave had cut through a lot of red tape to develop this thing, but he wasn't worried about it. He had this attitude, more of an outlook on life, I guess. He figured someone else would take care of it. His job was to come up with ideas. The other stuff, he'd leave to another department. So back to that spray bottle he was holding. It was the lab's prototype, Dave's first time testing this thing out. He took a breath, put on some plastic gloves, grabbed the spray bottle, lifted the lid on his kitchen trash, and sprayed the hell out of it. Nothing happened. The trash was still trash. Every second that passed, the knot in Dave's stomach grew until a half hour had gone by, and Dave got mad. He ripped off the spray bottle top and poured its contents into the bin. Chucked the bottle in too, then kicked the can for good measure. I actually empathized with the guy. Took a big swing and it didn't pan out. As a self-proclaimed idea man myself, I know what that feels like. To get excited about something. To imagine a future where it works out, then have it crash and burn. Sucks. So I can understand why Dave went to sleep that night in a bad mood, replaying the day's disappointments, till the thrum of the city outside lulled him to sleep. Something woke him around midnight, a sound that stood out from Manhattan's soundtrack of honks and sirens. It was a rustle, followed by an occasional slurp. Kinda reminded Dave of the time he went camping. It was forever ago with his parents. A bear got into their trash. That's what it sounded like. Something going through his trash. Dave sat up. The rustling continued. He got out of bed, plodded to the door, listened. More rustling. Another slurp. Then came a scraping sound. Plastic on tile, followed by a sudden, loud crack. Dave shot into the kitchen, flicked on the light. The can had moved from where it was beside the counter to the center of the floor. He stepped towards it. He didn't like the way his heart was racing, or the way his foot shook as it tapped against the can's lever. The lid flew open to reveal trash. The discarded spray bottle, his kitchen entrails, a microwave dinner tray, some soggy papers and the like. You know, your typical kitchen garbage. He started to withdraw his foot, but that's when the waste moved. Or maybe swirled is a better word. His microwave dinner box undulated, and some old receipts fluttered. An apple core, melded with an old napkin, emerged from the muck, reaching for Dave. He slammed the lid shut, stared at the bin, blinked again. Of course he knew he dumped out those chemicals, but they were supposed to shrink debris, not make it move. It was impossible. And here began the rigmarole we always see, the internal effort to explain away the supernatural. Dave ended his mental gymnastics with a decision. He'd better just toss it, out of sight, out of mind, you know? 'Cause like always, Dave had decided that whatever was going on with his garbage was someone else's problem. He grabbed his bin and flew down the hallway to his floor's trash chute, shoved the bag in, then watched the metal door slam shut. A squishy thumping sound followed as the bag made its way into the bowels of the building. Dave felt himself relax. Now he could return to his uneasy sleep, because whatever that was, it was gone. Not exactly. You see, for Dave, throwing that bag away was the end of something. For the trash, and for a few other poor souls, it was just the beginning. Now, the guy telling me this story didn't know what happened after Dave threw out his refuse. So this is one of those times where I have to theorize on a few details about the strange thing in Dave's kitchen bin and how it turned into a creature we should all fear. When Dave tossed his waste down the chute, it fell into the building's trash room, where it sat in a dumpster, beside all the other trash bags from all the other tenants. Thing is, garbage doesn't always stay where you left it. Holes form in plastic, corners seep. Rats get in and take a potato peel or two. It's hard to contain, even on a good day. And today wasn't a good day. Yeah, Dave's trash didn't stay in its bag. It seeped. It moved. It leaked, spreading from one bag to another. Now, remember that swirling movement Dave saw in his kitchen? pretty soon, the whole dumpster looked like that. It was pulsing. One could almost call it alive, or gestating, ready to be born. But even so, this trash was contained in a metal dumpster. Theoretically, it couldn't keep spreading. Didn't stay that way, though. In the morning, the building super pushed that dumpster to the curb, just like he did every trash day. He could have been tired, so maybe he didn't notice the dumpster looked weird. And maybe he didn't hear its disturbing noises. He might not have seen how full it was either. Full enough that a big black bag fell off the top. It landed on the sidewalk, where a mountain of other garbage bags were already stinking up the cement. It was trash day, remember? So every storefront on the block had their crap out there, including the butcher shop next door. The bag that fell from the dumpster split. Its juices ran down the sidewalk, hit the butcher's trash, and this insidious, contagious thing, it infected that trash. Now, the butcher's garbage. It was touching the bags from the bodega next door. You probably get the idea. Everything on that curb was getting corrupted by Dave's waste, or whatever ravenous thing it was becoming. I'll remind you again, it was trash day, and there was an unassuming sanitation worker who picked up this curb. It would not be a regular day on the job. Lewis had worked the same route every morning for the last 20 years. His least favorite stop? The butcher shop. The dead animal gut smelled terrible, and there were always a ton of rats. Pig and cow entrails were irresistible to vermin. But someone had to do it, and if he didn't haul that trash away, he'd be making it someone else's problem. A quick word on Lewis. He was salt of the earth, born and raised in Queens, which might be why Lewis took his job seriously. He was a New York devotee and was happy to help clean the city up. He didn't have to love trash. He just had to take care of it. So that morning, Lewis pulled up to the curb, lined his truck up with the apartment building's dumpster, then pulled a lever. The truck's prongs groaned as they speared the handles of the dumpster. The container lifted. Then came a loud, satisfying crash as garbage poured into the top of the truck. Lewis jumped out and got started on the bags. He threw one in the back, but when he went to grab the next one, he stopped. There was a head on the sidewalk. It was a pig's head. Must have fallen out from a butcher shop bag. Lewis gagged. He reached a gloved hand down to push it back into a sack. As he did, he looked into one of its vacant eyes. A pit of black death. And then it winked at him. It's shocking, seeing a severed animal head wink at you, and Lewis's body went straight into flight mode. He lurched backwards and tripped over the heap of bags behind him. He plunged into their sticky plastic abyss, an abyss that seemed intent on keeping him there. The material stuck to him as he tried to get up. Each time he pulled a hand free, whatever bag he was touching wrapped around it again. Then he felt the slick, foul plastic move to his neck. Lewis finally managed to tear himself away. He scrambled to his feet, panting. But he couldn't dwell on whatever that was, because the pig's head was still on the sidewalk, and now its mouth hung open. It was rocking back and forth, too. Some old soda cans had embedded themselves into its stump. They quivered and rolled. The movement pushed the head up till it stared at Lewis and let out an uncanny squeal. Lewis screamed right back. His foot lashed out. It connected with the monstrosity and shot it into the bag it fell out of, which Lewis then heaved into the back of his truck. Then he lunged at the vehicle's compactor level and pulled. The metal teeth moved unbearably slow as they closed. Lewis could see the pig head lurch up, its dead eyes open wide, its mouth gaped. All around it, bits of garbage writhed, a motley crew of vipers. A coil of discarded wire suddenly lashed out from the muck, but then the jaws closed tight. The pig let out a final scream. and all was quiet. Lewis was shaking, and I mean really shaking, because he'd just seen the trash come alive. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I said, he'd been doing this job for 20 years. In that time, the trash had come alive a grand total of 0 times. The morning hubbub of the city went on around him, like nothing had happened at all. Cars honked, doors slammed, trucks backed up. People got off the subway, ignoring him as they always did. It should have been comforting in its normalcy, but right now it felt dooming, like he'd stepped into the eye of a hurricane, one that only he could see. Then there was another noise, a low rustle of papers and plastic, a dying squeal of a rat, the crunch of bones, and then a loud, visceral slurping noise. Lewis turned. The remaining mound of trash still sat on the sidewalk, and all the bags were squirming, their contents strained against their restrictive plastic covers, fighting to get out. A loud rip startled Lewis, and he saw a scene form on one of them. A barrage of rotting entrails from the butcher shop threatened to spill. He didn't want to know what would happen if it did. Lewis ran, but not away from this disgusting, horrific sight. He ran towards it. With a frantic urgency, he hauled the leaking sack into the compactor. Then he grabbed another and another. These bags fought against him, plastic wrapped around his hands. One had a coat hanger in it that clawed at his arm. But Lewis didn't stop till the curb was empty, and the truck's jaws closed on the last wriggling piece of junk. Lewis was drenched in sweat when he got behind the wheel. His arms were covered in cuts and bruises, but the back of the truck was quiet, which was a relief. He guessed the compactor had taken care of things. Killed whatever, hell, Lewis couldn't even begin to guess what that was. He was just glad it was dead. He couldn't wait to get its carcass out of his truck. 15 minutes later, Lewis pulled up to his destination, the transfer station. It's like a big warehouse that sits on the river. At its center is a massive pit, about as big as a football field. If you've ever thrown something out in New York, chances are it ended up here. Lewis was really late, the last in a long line of the city's trucks, all there to dump their morning haul. He tapped the steering wheel as he waited, jiggled his leg. His eyes moved from the rearview mirror, glancing at the back of the truck. Finally, it was his turn. He pulled into the transfer station, which was now deserted, since everyone had already come and gone. He backed up to the very full pit. His truck's rear panel groaned as it opened. The compacted debris fell out, joining the dregs. He let himself relax after that. The contaminated trash was gone. But as we've learned already, out of sight isn't really out of mind. A loud sucking sound came from behind him, the shifting of paper and plastic. Lewis told himself not to look, to drive away. But if he wasn't going to look into that pit, no one would. So yeah, Lewis looked. Now I want this image to sit real deep in your minds. Imagine a body of water, how it sways and ripples. Then a wave crests up, splashing against the rocks. It kinda looked like that. See, the trash Lewis dumped had moved fast. A voracious disease infecting each area of garbage it touched. So when Lewis looked behind him, the entire pit was in motion. I'm talking candy wrappers, expired dog food, paper, diapers, urine-soaked towels, someone had thrown away a body part or two in this heap. All that had become one massive, breathing organism of filth that swayed and rippled and crested up into a wave, which then barreled straight towards Lewis. Lewis leapt to the side just as a torrent of garbage swept over the edge of the pit. A rancid stench hit his nostrils. The sticky residue of moisture pooled onto the platform beneath him. A metallic groan made him look back. An old rusted tent frame bent itself around the back wheels of the truck. then yanked it into the putrid abyss. Screaming metal and popping tires echoed through the warehouse as the truck disappeared beneath the grime. The ocean of garbage rippled like a belch from a large meal. And Lewis sat there, stunned and afraid, knowing he was this thing's dessert. That was the precise moment Dave arrived at the transfer station. See, after his failure the night before, he was on the hunt for a new idea. He thought a tour of the station would help get inspiration flowing. First thing he saw when he got inside was Lewis, sprawled out on the floor by the pit. He didn't get a chance to notice much else, though, because a stained, moth-eaten mattress wrapped in some metal siding flew out of that pit and swept him off his feet. Dave hit the ground, hard. Before the pain could sink in, the mattress was on him. A hole in its underside opened like a mouth and sucked Dave's foot into its gullet. Dave screamed as the bones in his ankle shattered from the pressure of the springs, then screamed even louder when he was yanked across the floor, towards the pit. A hand grabbed his. Lewis. He pulled. Dave kicked, till his foot wrenched away from the mushy springs. He stumbled up, allowing Lewis to pull him behind a metal crate. The two men caught their breath and listened to the trash churn in the pit nearby. Lewis looked to Dave, said he recognized him. He was with the city, right? At Dave's nod, Lewis launched into his saga about the butcher shop, the pig head. Dave didn't reply because, well, he knew the butcher shop was on his block. And he was also realizing that the pit looked a whole lot like the bin in his kitchen. So, as impossible as it seemed, he understood he might be responsible for all this. Of course, he didn't say that. Instead, he said the first idea that came to him: burn it. It wasn't a bad idea, but there was a catch. There wasn't an incinerator there. The transfer station sends trash out of state to get burned, which made Dave realize they had another problem. The waste in this station was sent to a few different places: upstate New York, New Jersey, South Carolina. Any minute now, one or more trucks would arrive to pick up some of this garbage and disperse it throughout the country, which meant they had to act quick, or this thing would spread far and wide and become so huge it'd be unstoppable. Dave knew all this and knew burning it was the answer. But how? Remember, he was the idea guy. He didn't actually implement things. Good thing for him that he was with Lewis, and Lewis was a doer. Lewis closed the station doors so the trucks couldn't come in, found some gasoline, grabbed some matches. Don't ask where, it doesn't matter. Then he dribbled a trail of gas from the crate to the edge of the pit, soaked the side of it, all while the slimy, putrid beast writhed behind him. Dave watched from behind the crate. Then the men shared a look, nodded. The guy who had done his best to handle this mess, and the guy who had made it. Both were ready to turn this place into an inferno. Life isn't fair, though, because just as Lewis was about to light a match, a wave of trash roared over the edge of the pit. The filth pelted him with rotten meat and papers and old machinery. He fell to the ground, wailing as a corroded fishhook found its way into his thigh. Then he felt a rope twist around his ankle. He looked at Lewis. Fear leaked from his eyes, and then he was yanked towards the enraged, throbbing pit of waste. As he flew across the concrete, he chucked the matches at Dave. The last thing he did was scream, "Take care of it." Dave caught the matches, just as Lewis disappeared over the side. His screams continued as the trash churned, until there was a final choke. Then, silence. Dave watched the edge, hoping Lewis would pop back up. It took a roar from the ether to snap him out of it. Right, it was down to him. For once, he'd have to act first and think later. He whipped out a match. His fingers trembled so hard he dropped it. Grabbed one more. It wouldn't catch. Another roar came. The refuse swelled. It poured over itself as it crawled up the side of the pit and towards Dave. He frantically struck the match again and again. Nothing. The debris was almost to him. Then the match ignited. He dropped it. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling through the air, until it hit the trail of gasoline. Flame shot towards the pit, smacking the waste with an inferno. The thing erupted in a screaming, violent ball of fire. It popped. It belched. It wept. Until soon, the only thing Dave could hear was a low crackle as the station burned. Usually, this is the part where Dave would have this full circle revelation. And sure, he did. But that would come later. The fire died down. Then the place was hosed with decontaminants. But not every piece of trash had been incinerated. Some of those pieces got caught in a runoff from the decontaminants, and some of that runoff made its way into the sewer, into the bowels of New York City. And the waste in that runoff found other bits of trash in the sewer, and those bits found other bits. And I stopped the man, who I now understood was Dave, before he could finish. I asked if he was trying to say what I thought he was trying to say, that beneath our feet, in the guts of the city I loved, was a literal trash monster. Dave just offered me a smile, then looked down at the sewer grate on the street between us. As I followed his gaze, a waft of hot air blew between the metal bars, a subway passing below. It smelled slightly rancid, a whiff of decay. As the rush of the train faded, I could hear a rustling, like a lot of debris shifting. Then a slurp, a groan. Dave saw my eyes widen and assured me the beast was contained. Don't ask how. But he told me it could be eliminated. Only way to do that was to starve it. Dave didn't quite know how to do that, but he wasn't about to leave it to someone else. That's why he prowled the sidewalks of Manhattan, doing his best to get the word out, to put an end to the incessant, never-ending churn of junk that fed this thing. I looked back at the ground of garbage by the overflowing bin. Dave's goal was nice and all, but it was a bit of a pipe dream, right? Still, as I left him to his megaphone, I went to grab my cup. Maybe I'd hang on to it a bit longer, make sure it stayed my problem, and that it didn't feed the beast. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Kate Murdoch and produced by Abakar Adan and Lee Mengistu. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. Creature vocalization by Celia Anderson, and artwork by Jessica Clarkston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levitt. Executive producers at Will Media are Will Malnati and Rosie Guerin. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.